Good afternoon and welcome to the latest in the series of Family Business Insights as part of the 2021 Global Family Business Summit. This afternoon, we're talking all things next generation with a fantastic panel from around the world. I'm delighted to be joined by Gavin Annon from Mount Charles in Belfast, Nike Anani from the African Family Firms organisation, but who's actually just moved to Austin in Austin in the States, and Mairi from Scotland, Mairi Mickel from Mairi Mickel's Business Family. So good afternoon, everybody. If I can ask you just to start, Mairi, by a brief introduction in terms of your role in your business and your role now, and how you've kind of got into the work that you do with Next Generation.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having us all along here. So I am a fourth generation business owner of my family's almost 100-year-old construction business based in Glasgow in Scotland. And I spent 10 years there on the board in a marketing communications director role. I left about 10 years ago and set up my own consultancy firm, working solely with SME family businesses in the UK, Europe, some clients in the US. And so I help out family businesses that are going through succession, transition, stuck in conflict, family dynamics, and I work as an educator with various university business schools and as a non-exec as well. So sort of stick of rock, break me in half, and it's all family business. Yeah, and I really came into that after leaving my own business and finding that quite a bruising experience, and realizing that actually there was a need for others who really had deep empathy and understood how complex navigating change in family business can be as a family member. And it was from there that my consultancy was born.
And you've obviously been an active Next Generation member in your business too, so hopefully some great perspectives to come later. Nike, sorry, can I come to you?
Yes, you may. Hi, everyone. My name is Nike Anani. As Paul said, I'm based in Austin, Texas. I'm of Nigerian origin. I'm a second generation family business owner. So our family enterprise is in Lagos in Nigeria. I was on the board, an executive board member for 8 years. So I spent 10 years back home in Lagos and pioneered the family office as well to manage a family's investments and wealth, which I was CEO of for 10 years. I also consult with next generation family members, really those that are integrating into their family enterprises and trying to find themselves, identify where their strengths are, identify what their purposes are, helping in communicating, collaborating, and gaining clarity with parents. Also working in conjunction with their siblings. So siblings teams formation is a major theme as well. So I'm excited for this conversation.
Fantastic. And Gavin, although the other two have been in their family business, so you're still involved in your family business very actively at the moment. So tell us a little bit about your role and how you got involved and what Mount Charles does.
Yeah, sure, no worries. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see you. So as Paul kindly introduced me, my name is Gavin Annon, and I'm Sales and Marketing Director for the Mount Charles Group. And I believe we have a squad of Northern Irish people on this call today. So we're always safety in numbers when you're from Northern Ireland. So great to see you all. Yes, and Paul's alluded to the fact that, yeah, I'm part of the family who had founded Mount Charles, which was founded by my father back in 1988. And ironically, his ambition in life was to be a policeman. And thankfully, when he wanted to sign up as a policeman, he was a quarter of an inch too small. So if he had been a quarter of an inch too tall, I may not have been here today for the job that I do. And indeed, the 2,500 team members that we employ may have had jobs elsewhere. So thankfully he was too short and we kicked off. So yeah, the company has grown massively since 1988, primarily as a contract catering company, but moved quickly into different service lines. And that was just primarily by doing really, really good service for our clients. And yeah, so I joined the company a very long time ago and have just worked up in a number of different roles at different levels to learn about the company and most importantly, understand each segments of them so that when the Legacy and Next Generation program does come to its fruition, that I've had complete exposure of the whole business across the estate.
And Gavin, did you always want to join the family firm? Is that the intention?
Yeah, for sure. Look, it's when you have something like this, which we're so proud of and has been such a huge success and a national local story that people recognize day and daily, how could you not want to be part of it? But you've got to want to be part of it rather than to be told that you're being part of it. I think that's very, very clear, and there has to be a fine line between that. And I did go off and do a few ventures before I joined the company. Some worked and some didn't, which was great because you learn from your failures as much as you learn from your successes. And then just instinctively, the time came right for me to join and start that journey of learning about the company and making sure that everyone knew I was fully committed. Because if you're half in, it's not enough. You've got to be fully committed.
Yeah. And what are your earliest memories of Mount Charles growing up? What are the earliest memories that drew you into the business and gave you that kind of emotional connection?
Yeah, so when I was a very, very young, my dad used to take me around on Saturday afternoons on all of our site visits, and he knew everybody from pot washer right up to managers levels, first names, and made sure that he talked to everybody. So I remember going to the front of the cafes and into the kitchen, and you could just feel the family spirit, that everyone was part of this extended family that we had managed to build. And whether people work for us for part-time, full-time, or a lifetime, it was clear that even from a very early age, he was showing us as family members, this is what we have built. And it's such a strong, passionate company that even the people who work every day, they love seeing us and know that the family is fully behind the success of keeping this going for a very, very long time. And I really enjoyed just engaging with customers and clients and seeing how the mechanics of it worked. So that would have been from 10, 11, 12 years of age. My Saturday afternoons were spent, most kids were out playing football, and I was learning about how coffees and ice creams were sold.
Fantastic. And Mairi, the same question to you and Nike as well, in terms of you've moved on from your roles in the business now, but actually, what are your memories of growing up and what made you decide to join your family firm? So Mairi, come to you first.
Well, I think because we've been in construction, you're creating a product that is like a legacy in itself, a visible legacy. So even driving around Edinburgh as a child, and my dad would say, look, there's our sales board, and it had my name on it. So I felt this sort of sense of responsibility, but also pride, because my dad's an architect. So he would talk a lot about, oh, I designed that particular set of railings, or, I added this detail to this house type, and making sure that our architects were doing it in the way I wanted to. So I sort of grew up with that sense that it was something very important. It's people's home. It's the biggest investment you're ever going to make in your life financially. So I think there was a sense of pride in that and excitement in that. But as Gavin said, there was never an obligation to join. I didn't feel that either. It was just sort of a conversation that evolved over time. But yeah, I think very much it was the visibility made me realize, oh, I'm part of something bigger than just our family. This is a business family, and I'm part of that, and I have a responsibility.
And Nike, presumably that resonates. You're nodding. Presumably that resonates with you.
It does, but my story is a little different in that I grew up in Lagos in Nigeria, where my dad founded our business, and I was really young, right? My dad started entrepreneurship the year I was born. So it was always around me, but I was too young to really appreciate what it really meant. I do remember a couple of conversations, because he was always gone. He would always travel to the north of Nigeria for business. And I remember a couple of conversations where I was 6 at the time, and I said to my dad, what's up? How are you? And he said, I'm stressed, I'm broke. And I was like, what's broken? And he was like, when I say I'm broke, it means that I have assets, but I don't have cash. And so that was like my first kind of exposure to the world of business. At age 9, my dad and my parents decided that myself and my brothers would move to the UK with my mum. So we were then even more far removed from the business. And so I started my career in London in the Big Four, and got quite bored and was trying to discover myself, and decided to take some time out and to go back to Nigeria, because all this while Dad had stayed back and was building the business. And so it was a reacquaintance with our family business. This was 10 years ago now, when I moved back to Lagos. And so what I really loved about it was, because I'd been away from my dad for 16 years, Dad would visit and we would visit him, but it was this common bond and common passion that we had, right? And an opportunity to get to know him as an adult. What definitely resonates with what Gavin and Marie said is there was definitely no obligation. It was very organic. It was a phone call, Dad, I can't see myself in accountancy for the rest of my life. I don't know what I want to do. And he was like, why don't you come to Nigeria and get to know the real business world and get exposed? And I was like, okay. And I was supposed to be there for 3 years, and 3 years morphed into 10 years. So I think definitely not making the next generation feel obligated is key. Exposing them as much as possible. I wish I had been exposed from a very young age. Beyond that one conversation, I wish I'd been taken to work and, you know, gotten to really appreciate, because it was a bit of a shock when I moved back 10 years ago to see the scale of the operations, like Marie's business, our family business is in construction as well. So yeah, that was my journey.
So it's interesting talking to the three of you. You've all obviously grown up with family business around you, and it's obviously had a very positive experience because you've all ended up going in. We talked to some next gen in terms of they're not sure there's an obligation. So in terms of educating the next generation of family members, when do you think is the right time to start? What sort of age range are we looking at? Are we looking at 4 or 5 because it's subtly going in through the emotions that Nike talked around, or do you think it should be more structured and later on? I mean, Mairi, I'll come to you first. When's a good time to start actually inducting and sharing knowledge about the family business with the next gen?
I think if you're a G2 family business member like Nike was, you're growing up in it, yeah? And when you moved away, you said you were then not so exposed to the business. So I think most Generation 2s, the parents are the founders. And so actually they are exposed and they are educating, because sometimes they have to go and, as Gavin said, you know, Saturdays spent down the business doing the work. I think as you go through the generations, that education and exposure and preparation has to be more planned. It won't happen as naturally. I mean, we've raised we're all raising our children to sort of think about their kind of happiness first, and the choice they have is huge. I think it was Dennis Jaffe talking recently, saying that it's really important to balance that conversation, do what you want to do in life, follow your passion, with to say one day you might be an owner of this family firm. And there will be some responsibilities that come with that. And this is how I handled it. So yes, be happy in your career, no obligation, pressure to join. But don't forget, there's a firm here, a business that I've worked in that has provided you with the lifestyle you've had. So that actually the thinking is try and have that conversation about what the business might mean to them as early as each child's maturity allows it, I would say.
Yeah. And obviously you're talking there about the complexities, because you're talking about roles going into a business and doing a role. You're also talking about becoming a responsible owner if you end up becoming one of the owners of the business going forward. So there are different hats even at a young age, aren't there, in terms of education?
Yeah, and I think children, I've had a child as young as 9 say to me he felt obliged to join his father's business. So they pick up, you know, children really pick up in the sense of what might be expected of them. So have the conversation as early as you think they're ready.
Okay, Nike, would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. I think it's really important to try to get the children to fall in love with the business on their own. And that's not mandated. It's not automatic. It takes time. You know, it takes exposure. It takes them having many interactions with the business and asking questions. And like we said, it doesn't necessarily mean they'll be a leader in the business. They may just remain an owner. But even at that, ownership takes responsibility, and it's a lot of responsibility. It means understanding corporate governance, understanding family governance, understanding, you know, law, trusts, foundations, financial statements. That's a lot of preparation. I mean, I remember when I moved back to Nigeria and started the family office, and initially I felt kind of cheated of my 20s because a lot of my friends didn't have to deal with having to set up a family office and worry about trusts and wills and foundations. And it was heavy responsibility. There was a lot to train up on. I was a chartered accountant, and so I was well versed in these areas. But had I not had that experience, it would have been a huge leap, a huge jump. And I would have needed to get these skills from outside. So I think as early as possible, at the very least, you're preparing the next generation to be owners. And being owners is not just, you know, putting your feet up and just, you know, wagging your finger and just waiting for your dividends to come in. It's not owning shares in Apple or Amazon. It's owning shares in a heavy company that there are relationships to manage, there's legal considerations, there's planning to think about. So it takes time. So as early as possible.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. And I think you hit I'm an accountant too. I trained as an accountant and took a different journey. But actually, the number of next gens in particular in their 30s that still haven't been exposed necessarily to financial statements and need some understanding and help with some of the financials they're prepared with is something we come across quite a lot of the time. Gavin, what did you do in terms of preparation, in terms of getting ready to take that step to come into Mount Charles? Did you do anything formal, or was it just a kind of a day one, I'm here, where do I go from here? You've got some knowledge, but what did you do to plan to step into the business?
Ask loads of questions was the best advice I can give, because with the best will in the world, there are thousands of different programs and schemes and leadership programs that you can do, which by the way, don't get me wrong, are all hugely successful things to do. But the one best way you can learn is by doing it, making the mistakes, asking the questions, how to fix it, and then learn. So that would be definitely my number one golden piece of advice for anyone on the next gen route. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and make sure that you're surrounding yourself with the very best people who do what they do very, very well, because they are critical for your trust and for your succession, to make sure that they understand that you're fully passionate behind this and willing to learn on the job.
And you stepped into a business. Was your father still involved at that time?
Yeah, he's still involved today. He's still our active chairman, and hugely proud of what he's created, and wants to make sure it's a sustainable long-term success for a very long time. So, but equally, he's realized that the world has changed, and the way that we have to do business has also changed with technology, and making sure that we're prepared for the future. If we present our company to anyone, they just may think it's a pretty standard contract catering company with cleaning and vending and security, etc. But when you look at the mechanics behind it, it's a hugely developed ecosystem that's there to be robust, and you've got to learn that as well, because again, that could change in 5-10 years when something else happens to the world, God forbid. But you've always got to be prepared for the worst.
Yeah, no, I think I'd agree with that. That's good advice as well. Ask loads of questions, and don't be afraid to actually ask the question that needs to be asked. Just because you're a family member doesn't mean you know everything, does it?
No, and you'll get so much credibility by avoiding assumptions, where if you come in and you expect that everyone thinks they should have all of the problem solving answers, and you're just here to give a direction, that's not the case. You've got to be a servant to the business, and you're serving leaders and your own team and yourself, to make sure that you're always developing.
Did you have an understanding really at that time, Gavin, in terms of the culture of the organisation, the purpose, what it was there for, and some of the value sets? Or was that something you've learned since taking the leap?
Yeah, well, we look at a family culture always exists, but it's defining it is sometimes the challenge, and making sure that people who are part of the organization also understand what they are. Now, we launched a 5-year strategy a couple of years back, and ironically, COVID landed in the middle of it, which was a good thing and a bad thing. But we redefined our values into 3 very, very simple straplines, which was do the right thing, have fun, and grow together, and take pride in what you do. And the reason why we simplified them, Paul, was that they have to be really tangible and easy for people to understand, to say that this is what this company stands for. Because if you over-engineer a culture and the values, then it becomes hard for people to believe it. And we're not expecting everyone to be us, but what we want them to understand is that if our clients give us the chance to work with them, they got our family trust. And if people, again, if they want to be here part-time, full-time, or a lifetime, they're part of our extended family. So we'll always do cultural refresher sessions, and making sure that our tone and message is very, very clear that we're a family-owned company, because it is the one biggest competitive advantage that we have, is being family-owned. We can make decisions quickly, and we can be flexible.
I love the phrase, and you obviously work in sales and marketing, but I love the phrase part-time, full-time, or for a lifetime. I mean, that embodies the whole family business culture that we all work around, but I've never actually heard it said in that way before. So yeah, I'll make a note of that one and use that on a number of occasions going forward. Mairi and Nike, in terms of the family businesses that you've seen and worked with over the years, and it's difficult to generalize, I know, but should the next generation, do you think that it works better if they go outside and work elsewhere first and bring something back, or they go jump straight in? What are the benefits and disadvantages of each? Niki, I'll come to you first.
From the perspective, I often do a lot of one-on-one work with next gens. I've seen that those that have had outside experience have developed not only a sense of their identity and their confidence. And I think that's the most important thing, is really the stories they tell themselves. I strongly believe that the stories we tell ourselves are the most important thing. And that would, set you up for failure or set you up for success. Quite often, next gens are grappling with living in the shadow of the founder and not really having a strong sense of who they are, what they can achieve, and feeling like their world is controlled by the founder and the founder's identity, the founder's success. And so giving them the opportunity, or them giving themselves the opportunity to develop themselves outside of the sphere of the founder's world and gain competence, gain confidence in other areas is really invaluable for themselves. Also, I've noticed that for those next gens that have had that outside experience, they have a different worldview to the family business and are able to bring something positive back. Either those that have worked in, quite a number of my clients have been schooled in the UK or the US, and they come back to Africa. And so they have a more global view and are able to bring something new to the family enterprise. That in itself poses challenges, because then there's a cultural clash. But nevertheless, I do believe that diversity of perspectives, diversity of experiences makes us better for it. So I'm definitely an advocate where possible for next gens to get experience outside of the family business before coming back for their self-confidence.
And do you think that's more relevant to the second generation stepping into the business? And presumably, I'm putting words in your mouth and not meaning to, but third, fourth, fifth generation stepping in, they've seen the process before. Do you think it gets easier, or do you still think they have to find their own identity and their own purpose in order to add value when they come in?
I would assume it would get easier, right? Because in second generation, it feels like we're just still kind of winging it. We haven't yet usually established a family governance. We haven't established the policies, the procedures. We're kind of, like what you were saying, Gavin, explicitly defining things, explicitly defining the purpose, explicitly defining the culture. And we're moving on a journey of formalizing. And I presume that the families I've seen in third, fourth generation, they tend to have more governance. That's not to say that in itself, there's no challenges in still finding one's purpose and identity. However, there's more structure there.
Yeah, as they get bigger and they get more multi-generation, I guess they put more structures in place. It becomes a little bit more professional because the business needs it, but it's horses for courses. Mairi, what would you add to that?
I loved what Nikki said. I think it really depends on the business as well. So for my family business, all of generation 3, so I'm G4, all of generation 3 had worked elsewhere before they joined the business too. So it just almost became a prerequisite for the 3 of us that joined from my generation that we would work somewhere before. My father had never talked to me about working in the business. I think he'd assumed my brothers would, because it's construction, and so it's quite patriarchal in terms of male dominated, especially in the boardroom. In fact, when I was promoted to the board, Paul knows this story, when I was 35, after the birth of, just 2 weeks after the birth of my second child, somebody reminded me of my grandpa's words in the 80s, in which he said, with his fist on the desk, there'll never be a woman in this boardroom unless to serve tea. So here's me being promoted to the boardroom thinking, what happens now? So I think that I love what Steve Legler said the other day about working somewhere where the person who writes your checks does not have the same surname as you. Massively important, not just in terms of the shadow piece that Nikki talked about, but also that idea of you really learn your value somewhere else. I found in my family business, no one said to me, oh, you've been brilliant at that, and you're really good at this. You just, no one ever says those kind of things to you, in my experience in your family business. So I had quite a bit of time working elsewhere before I joined. So I actually understood what my value was going to be upon joining. And that made things much more smooth. So I was able to articulate to not only the people whose team, which I was becoming head of, but also the rest of the business. So actually I felt like I came with some legitimacy and some value. And when I got promoted to the board and I felt I had that moment of imposter syndrome. Why am I here? I've had no formal qualifications to get here. I took myself off and got a couple of non-exec roles elsewhere to understand what my merit in the boardroom was and learn more. As Gavin said, spending time with the financial director and asking a lot of questions. I mean, poor guy, every board pack, I was with him for about 3 hours before the board meeting, really trying to understand the assumptions of the business to make sure I could sound intelligent and provide useful comments in the board meeting. So I think it's that it's yes, learn your value elsewhere and then come in with more confidence of who you are and what you can add.
Yeah, and I'd probably add to that something that we picked up in one of the sessions earlier this week is actually not to wade in. So on day one, you are new, just respect the people around you and listen to them, and actually make sure that you take them on the journey you're on, and you're on the journey they're on, and vice versa, just because otherwise you can alienate people quite quickly. Which brings me on to, and Gavin's already alluded to this, so I'll come to Mairi and Nike first. How do the next gen create legitimacy in a business and actually stand on their own 2 feet and actually earn the respect of their peers and actually become legitimate assets and people working in the firm in their own right? How does that manifest itself, and what can people do to ensure that the next gen have got a greater chance of succeeding?
I think it's as important to prepare the next gen for entry into business as it is to prepare the business for the next gen to come in. I think often too much focuses on the former and not the latter. So I would say for what I work with my clients on, it's not only the legitimacy of the next gen in the eyes of the business, but also the business thinking, do we deserve this person? Where is there room for them? How are they going to add to the strategy that Gavin was talking about? Because actually, unless you have a strategic direction for your business, how on earth are you going to know who do you need leadership-wise to get you there? So I think it's important for the business to have those parts beyond succession plan, but also strategic planning, and set the next gen up to succeed. I've seen far too many next gens who've gone into a vague role with no career plan, no sponsor, and it's led to resentment, real resentment. 10, 15 years on, I never really wanted to be here. My path's never been clear, and now dad won't get out the way. So I think actually it's all about communication is the way to, and setting up for success. So that you're not kind of sold into a golden handcuff situation where you think, I just have to wait my turn till mum or dad dies. I think that's very important. And that is about, as everyone's alluded to, better planning, better communication, better governance.
Nike, do you want to add anything to that?
I love everything you said, Marie. Like, you put the nail on the head. Let the business be prepared for the next gen. For what that definitely resonates. I think on the part of the next gen, also just working on your competence and your confidence. I think in terms of legitimacy, remembering that like when I moved back, I was 23, and shortly after I became a director, and I had reports that were my parents' age. So in a culture that's very elder dominant, where in Nigeria, you don't call people by first name if they're older than you. And it was really strange for me, navigating being a boss, but bossing people around that were way older than me. So learning to lead by persuasion as opposed to position is really key. Learning how to develop deep empathy for people that you're working with, understanding their perspectives, their priorities, their preferences, and being able to ensure that you gain their buy-in is really key as a young leader. That's what I would also add, in addition to the part of what the business needs to do to make room and prepare for the entry of the next gen. Yeah.
And Gavin, coming back to you then, in terms of what we've just heard from Nike and Mairi, you're the sales and marketing director, so you've created your space within the business. You've managed to get a voice. I'm assuming you've got a voice, and it's a legitimacy that you've created. What did you do personally within the business? How did you step up? Did you do more courses? Did you learn? Was it on the job? Did people help you? What did you do to enable you to fulfill your potential, which obviously is still growing?
Yeah, well, mostly on the job. Paul, I did a few courses in the background just to develop certain assets that I felt needed polished up on, but without the sake of repeating myself, asking those questions were critical. And in the early days, especially when you're just being exposed to such a big business, you do feel a sense of responsibility on your shoulders, and you'll question the question that you ask. So there's no such thing as a silly question in the early days, because the quicker you know the answers, the quicker people will start respecting you a bit more. But in terms of voice and that stepping up through the different layers of the company, you know, I was always told that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be heard. And it was a really powerful statement, because again, when you have that sense of responsibility on your shoulders, do you need to keep giving opinions and asking, you know, too much? Because then you've got to remember that you've built a team around you who are fantastic at what they do and strong assets to the company. So listening and engaging and actioning what's promised is critical, because that shows that you're fully committed to the company. They know that you're determined to be successful. You can't be a walkover, that's a given, because you've got to protect a company that has been built by a family that you're incredibly proud of. But equally, you can't be seen as untouchable either, because you're either part of the team or you're not. And that's definitely critical with your tone and your tact, and making sure that you've got that emotional intelligence and resilience around you, because the one thing you don't want to be is inferior, and people don't appreciate the good things that you're trying to do to help everyone else.
How when you're doing that, Gavin, in terms of young, new to the business, all sorts of stuff going on in your own personal life and outside of work, how do you manage that relationship so that it doesn't become, I'm going to use the word overbearing, but so that it doesn't come business, because I've got to create that legitimacy. How do you put boundaries in place, and how do you manage your time to enable you to be good at work, but also be good for you as an individual?
Yeah, well, it's got to be about striking a balance. You know, if a family, if a generation shows that they're working far too much and are either working to live or living to work, that's going to set the wrong message. Because if people don't have their downtime to restock and reflect on what they've done and switch off, like, we genuinely encourage everybody, if you're off on holidays, you're off on holidays. And remember, if that unfortunate big red bus hit any of us, we've got to understand that we can still continue and make sure that there's enough knowledge around the company to keep going. So you've got to work hard and play hard is one motto that we try and bring into the company as well. That when we're all here, we're striving towards the same objective to make this the biggest success that we can. But also outside work, please enjoy yourself, have fun. You know, going back to part of our values, make sure that you're having fun and enjoy what you do, because I think we're all of the understanding that if you don't enjoy the job that you do, which is the majority of your life, there's no point in doing it.
Yeah, well, it's sound advice there, and Nick, I can see you nodding.
For sure, the piece on boundaries is really major. Gaining enough confidence in yourself, firstly, to know what it is you stand for, and then secondly, enough confidence to then communicate that to other people and enforce that. Is the life of the next gen, because you're constantly blurring family, business, obligation, responsibility, someone's expectation, your inner expectation. There's a constant tug of war, but at some point you have to enforce what's best for you.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because when we both come from professional services, and I just remember going into the office, and you might go in a bit later some days, and everyone would look at you going, well, you've come in late and then you're leaving early. And there's all this mentality in professional service and the commercial world, let's call it the commercial world, of if you work longer hours, you're working harder, but you're not necessarily working smarter. And in the family business, you then get that extra layer because you've got skin in the game, or your dad's the boss. And so it does become really hard, doesn't it?
It does. A lot of next gens that I've worked with have felt that pressure and like will feel compelled to be the first in the office and the last to leave, because there's a sense of entitlement that's projected onto them, and they're proving to everyone else and proving to themselves that they earned this and they worked hard for this. But at the end of the day, I think we have to live in alignment with what we stand for, not just based on the expectations or perceived expectations of other people.
Which goes back to what Gavin was saying, and I think Mairi echoed as well, in terms of values and purpose, and actually understanding your role and delivering it to the best of your ability, but not then overstepping and actually impinging on other parts of your own personal space. As a next generation, Gavin, you're a younger guy working in a business that's growing and going places. We often see that in the news headlines, and Mount Charles are always kind of in and around what's going on. Since your father and the previous generations were involved, business has changed and the skills have changed. What do you see as the skill set needed going forward for future generations? Because presumably they won't be the same skills that you have now or that your father has. They need to look at other other ways of doing business and actually how to evolve. What sort of skills would you be looking at from your next generation coming into Mount Charles?
Yeah, so it's a valid point, because we can't be stuck in the now. What do we have to do for the next 5 to 10 years to make this a success? And I before this session, I did a little bit of research just to see what the noise and the vibe was like out there, to see, you know, by 2030 what should leaders have in terms of skill sets. Ironically, I came across a Forbes article recently, and the 4 of the key skills that they commented on, which is a true reflection of what I believe in, is about being a futurist. So making sure that you're clear that the world can change and that you're prepared for it, and embracing technology, which, you know, COVID pushed us all that far. Family businesses can tend to be a very traditional style business where it's paper and trust, whereas technology and automation can feel like you're moving away from values, but it's not. And they also commented about being translators, you know, so listening and communicating are 2 very different things. And those skills are absolutely vital to make sure that your team understand that you're there for them, listening about what they're telling you, and also you're asking them what you should do as a company. And last but by no means least is as the previous panel expert said, is about what that next generation and even the generation after that looks like. Because family businesses, I don't think anyone ever wants them to end. So if it's that infinitive approach to it, how do we keep going? And the one best advice I will have is always keep evolving. Don't stand still, because you'll get left behind.
Yeah, you need to remain relevant, don't you, to society at large, and make sure your business is still at the fore of what you do in order to survive. Nike, Mairi, you've been involved in the family business field and the consulting world for a number of years. Not very many, because you're both very young in terms of what you do. But talking to people like Steve Legger and Dennis Jaffe over the past few weeks, the family business world in America started in the late 60s, early 70s, and it's now come across the Atlantic. Do you think it will get easier as there's more in the public domain for next gen to read and understand, and more about family business? Or do you think it's just going to be the same in terms of the next gen just need to do what they do now going forward? Do you think it will get easier for them?
I think the resources and the awareness and the communities are important. In that regard, it will get easier. But I think our world is changing, like Gavin was alluding to, and our world is changing at a very, really fast rate, right? So, you know, our thinking, our application, even in the industry, has to adapt to this changing world. Our families are changing. Our families are becoming more globalized, and families are geographically dispersed. This adds a whole lot of complexity to the world of, you know, for a next gen. A common issue we see in Nigeria is a lot of the next geners don't want to come back to Nigeria. So they school in the UK or the US or Canada, and they're like, bye, I'm getting my job here, or I'll start my business here. And then their parents on the other side of the Atlantic are like, what's going to happen in the next 10 years? What's the future of this business? So I think in one breath, it has made things a lot easier. I wish I had the amount of resources that are available now, communities and advisors and coaches and mentors and guides that are available, but also our world is changing really drastically.
The life of the next gen is never easy, is it?
No.
Mairi, did you want to add anything?
I loved what Gavin said and the little bit of research that you've done, because what that talks to for me is adaptability. Yeah, in whatever format that needs to be required looking forward. One of the other things, I loved your question though, Paul, does it get any easier? Does life ever get any easier? I think that as Nikki said, the forums that we have now, Paul and I run a peer group for next gen leaders, and actually we've just found that, you know, you open the floodgates and it can be an overwhelming set of complexities that next generation are dealing with. In part, I think what I'm seeing changing, and actually I really welcome the conversation, is about what are our obligations as good ancestors. And I've just bought a book about what makes me a good ancestor. And for me, where I see the conversation evolving for us as next gens, but also our children, is how do we ensure that the business is able to deliver what's important to the ownership vision or the family vision? And I'm not just talking about financially important. The money often in a family business is just a way of doing good and delivering socio-economic ambitions. And I think those socio-economic ambitions are shifting. We've seen so much about COP26 happening in Glasgow these past 2 weeks. And I think the environmental impact and family businesses on a mission to adapt, to be good ancestors, to ensure that their impact as they are here as stewards is minimized. I think those conversations, Next Gen are going to be stepping into more of a leading role in those conversations, whether it's in the business hands-on, like Gavin is, or whether it's even my role as I regard it as family champion, you know, as an owner, slightly apart from the business. I think that's going to be coming up more and more.
Sorry, what are the biggest sticking points for next generation of family members joining their business? Mairi, I'll come to you first, and we'll go around and ask you all the same, because I'm always looking to try and understand what's current, what are causing the biggest issues for next gen in and stepping into their businesses.
I think scrutiny. I tell the story that my cousin and I had a fallout in our family business, quite a public spat, actually, about 20 years ago, probably now, and we made up privately. And then we realized there was a certain feel in the business. What's going on? Why is everyone a bit uncomfortable? And actually the staff or the employees wanted to see that there was, you know, our relationship equaled their jobs and their certainty and longevity. So we had to stage this sort of makeup in the office. So I think scrutiny is a real sticking point because everyone is watching you. I'm sure Gavin feels that. I think the other thing is when it's time for the older generation to leave and genuinely let their offspring fly. That's a constant sticking point. Right at that tipping point, you can have all the talk, but what meaningful roles are the older generation going on to, and are they actually going to properly let go? I think COVID did a lot in regards next gen leadership acceleration. So there's lessons to be learned there, but those are the sort of sticking points I see quite a lot of.
Okay, Nike, what would you add to that?
Also, trying to drive change is the sticking point for a lot of next gens, trying to make the family business, you know, more future focused, or tech, innovation, digitizing, and finding resistance on the part of the founders is a common area of challenge for next gens.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. And Gavin, would you add anything from the inside in terms of what are the biggest sticking points? You may not want to. I'd appreciate if you don't want to answer that question, by the way.
No, I'll talk generally about it. No, look, truthfully, we're in a strong place, and thankfully there's not too many sticking points. But one thing that we have been very conscious of is to avoid a them and us mentality. So what we don't want to look like is that there's a family running the company, and the us is then all of the people who are working for the company. Everyone has to be together. And that takes time, because when you get bigger and you get the corporate structure and the governance kicks in, people naturally can feel that you lose family values. So when you get bigger, you've got to remind people we're still the same company, we're just getting better at what we do. And that can be tricky, because next gen, again, with responsibility on your shoulders, you feel that you've got to make a genuine difference and grow and get bigger and better. And that the tone and the messaging of that's got to be, you've got to be very careful in how you word it and present it, because it's not the case that you want to get too big and everything's forgotten about. You're bringing people on that journey, and that's all about like we would run strategy refresh seminars and, you know, family value reminders to say, look, we're still the same company, we're big enough to cope, but we're small enough to care. So that's tricky at times, but absolutely Nikki's right. You know, when change is usually the first thing that happens when you want to get better and bigger, and as long as you can get people to embrace that, it's better with them coming you on the journey than against you.
And I guess over time, if you've done other things and other changes and people have seen those and seen how they've been implemented, it helps with the culture and it being embedded, doesn't it, in terms of the whole family values being embedded into what the business is doing.
Very much so, yeah. Like you've got to look back on the stuff that you've done and said, did I and my team make a genuine difference? And if we've made a difference and it's been successful and we've evaluated it together, then it proves that if we come up with these great ideas, 9 times out of 10 they may not work, but that one magical moment, it gives everyone so much more belief and success, that they've been part of something that's made a genuine difference. So we would always try and apportion a credibility right, because we don't want all the them and us mentality again, that all of the us is doing the working and all of them is taking the glory. That's not the way family businesses work. We're all one big family.
So you celebrate the successes with the people that matter.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Mairi, you alluded to it just now, I think, in terms of we're coming through, hopefully coming towards the end of the pandemic, in terms of some of the serious impacts on lockdowns and restrictions being lifted. How do you think the last 18 months has impacted that generational transition, the next generation coming in, stepping up, and the older generation relationship? Do you think it's made an impact at all?
Yes, I mean, I've seen lots of elder generations where the founder, especially in that sort of G1 to G2 transition, they've not been able to go into the business because they've been having to be at home and shielding. And that has definitely accelerated the leadership exposure of their next generation. I've seen what I've also called ownership moments, where owners who have stepped back further from the business, either retired or genuinely passed on and are being sort of non-exec chair, have really stepped back in through that fear. Oh God, this is my financial security, and COVID is causing us such a lot of financial problems. Here's my lifetime of hard work possibly going down the drain, and the security for me and my family no longer is viable. So I've seen those ownership moments where people have stepped right back into the core of the business. And actually that's caused quite substantial waves. The business I work with in the States, you know, for years they've sorted out who boss was, and it was second generation CEO son, and then dad comes back in and says, no, I'm the boss again. That causes huge confusion. I've seen ownership transition defaulting, where next generation are buying the business from their parents through the business. And actually, because the business's financial liquidity has slowed down, they've had to default on these payments that have been all set up with the bank. So yeah, there's been a huge number of impacts, but I think actually there's nothing like a crisis to come back, Gavin sort of alluded to it earlier, and refresh your strategy and actually sit down and say, okay, how did we adapt? What have we learned? And as next generation, and the additional roles I took on and the difficult moments we had, where are we going from here and how are we doing it together?
Yeah, I'd agree with what you just said, actually. And I think it's really important to document it, because it has been a torrid 18 months for many businesses, but they've learned a lot and they've embraced, they've pivoted and they've changed. What they really need to do, as Gavin alluded right up front, is there will be another disaster or another crisis down the line, and we can all learn from sharing and documenting and updating things as well. So it's really important that, like anything to do with family business, that it's written down.
Yeah.
Nikki, what would you say in terms of the impact on the pandemic? Has it made big impacts in terms of businesses in, I guess, the ones that you're involved with, the ones in Africa and Nigeria? What have you seen from your perspective?
I've seen a bit of a mixed bag. I agree with Marie's observations. I've seen, on one hand, founders in terms of crisis, panicking and holding even tighter to their businesses, and many promises of letting go and giving the next gen responsibility have been broken, and that, you know, is straining the relationship. I've also seen on the other side forced successions, unfortunately, due to founders passing away, and next gens having to step up to the table with their siblings and navigate, you know, driving a business forward in times of a crisis, when they weren't necessarily as active on the ship. I've seen also there's been a lot of migration from Africa. So particularly South Africa and Nigeria, lots of business owners are moving to the UK and the US, having to then navigate cross-border management of businesses from afar, as well as looking at new opportunities in the UK and the US or in their respective locales. So it's been a bit of a mix, but I loved what you said about the crisis has given us an opportunity to kind of reflect and look at how we can reinvent. And like you said, it's really important that we do cherish this hour that we're in, and we do allow for intergenerational collaboration and co-creation of ideas that we're able to really chronicle and pass on to the next generation, because these are very unique times, and our future descendants will read about this, will hear about this, and how did we navigate through these times would be really powerful for them.
Yeah, and just the sharing of information. It's one thing I think the family business community is really powerful at, is actually sharing and collaborating, and the number of businesses that have come together over the last 18 months to help each other and succeed and strive to make a difference, and make a difference in the broader community that they're in as well, has been fantastic. Gavin, what would be your take in terms of COVID? How has that affected you as a business? How have you communicated with the broader sort of stakeholder base, your staff, and managed to kind of keep things going? What have been the plus points, or the plus points and the down points really for you?
Well, I'm always an optimist, so my glass is half full at the best of times. And I think with COVID, I mentally had to have it not even half full, but overflowing at times to make sure we made it through this. But one phrase I definitely cherished during COVID was that smooth seas doesn't make for good sailors, and it's a pretty powerful message, because if you don't navigate through those choppy waters, you're not going to be able to sail through anything else down the line again. So that was one thing that we definitely hung on to tight. But we stuck to 2 C's during COVID, and one was cash and the other was communication. So without cash, the business didn't exist. We couldn't pay our team members, we couldn't pay our bills, and we couldn't plan for the future. And without communication, we couldn't tell our team members and our clients and suppliers what was actually happening. So every single week we did video recordings, and that was from my dad to managing director to myself, and we pumped those messages out. And the one thing that we genuinely stuck to was honesty. Because if we didn't be honest, if we weren't honest from the outset to say, look, we can't save everybody and we can't keep all of our wonderful contracts open, but what we can do is promise you we'll do our very, very best, and reminded them about all of the things that we were doing in terms of cash to keep the company afloat. I think if we hadn't been as robust as that and as honest as we were, the good people that we unfortunately did have to let go have now come back to the company again, and they've retrained into different service lines, and they've just gone and got a part-time job to say, look, I honestly can't think of me working anywhere else. Again, back to the part-time, full-time, or a lifetime. They've moved through that journey, and to see that come back is just so humbling, because you've made a genuine difference. And it's definitely changed the protectionist attitude that you have to have for a company for the future, that you can't have a bulletproof shield on all the time, because then you're unapproachable. But what you can show is that, you know, you're strong, and you're learning constantly about dealing with the unexpected.
Yeah, that's really good advice, I think, for anyone going forward, is actually make sure you're in the best position you can be. And also, I guess, one thing that the pandemic's given all of us, from what I've heard, is that it's given us time to focus on a bit, take a bit of reflection, look back, look where we are, take stock, and work on the things that matter, rather than filling time with stuff that is actually inconsequential, because if that doesn't happen, then all of this doesn't need to happen anyway. So the strategic piece, I think, has come through, hasn't it? Yeah,
and panic breeds panic. It's the airline mentality. If you see other passengers panicking on an aircraft, maybe it's not too bad. If you see the air steward starting to panic, then you start to panic, and then the pilot panics, you really start to panic. So you've got to be careful about the attitude that you're showing throughout the company, because that resonates so very clearly that you're in control. That's the big thing, definitely, through a crisis. Don't be afraid to show that you're still in control, even though there's a lot of noise.
Yeah, sound advice. For those of you in the audience, if there are any questions, if you want to pop them into the chat before we wrap up, we'll happily ask those of our panel. I've got a couple of questions still to go. In terms of the different generations, and it's a little difficult to generalize, I know, but you've got the next generation, the existing older generation, that will at some point step back. 2 questions for each of you. One is, what can the next generation do to make the role in the family business have greater chance of succeeding? And what can the older generations do to bring on and onboard and help the next generation fulfill their full potential? What can the next gen do, and what can the older gen do to make the transition and the roles of the next gen in the business more successful? That was a really badly worded question, so I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it. Mairi, I'm going to come to you first.
No pressure then. I think thinking of what I wish I'd done, I wish that I had taken on a coach and a mentor and perhaps joined peer groups earlier. I didn't come to that point until quite far through my journey in my own family business as a next gen. I think there's so much more opportunity for support to help with confidence, which we've all talked about here. I think particularly because my background was communications, and in a construction company, it just felt like it was, well, what is this skill that you're bringing to the board? It's not technical. So I think for me, it would be that. It would be for next gens as peers. It's really a question why you're joining initially. Is it out of obligation? Are you wanting to be entrepreneurial in the business? What is it? Really looking underneath that, but then thinking about how you get your best support out with. And within, getting support within, kind of coming to the older generation, what they could do more of. I think I would always say to my clients, recognizing that you can't mentor your own children. It's pretty much impossible, especially if your specialism is similar, your technical specialism is similar. So I'd say try and find somebody else within your organization who your offspring can report to and be a sponsor to them. So you're thinking more about a long-term career plan rather than performance related markers during their career point, and also allowing them to have them an environment where they can moan about, you know, their family in the business. I think it's important to have an outlet for that with somebody who's very discreet, of course. So yes, and I think it's also part of the older generation's obligation to really set that smooth path into and beyond for the next gen. And as I said earlier, making sure that the business understand the value of the incoming next gen as well. So yeah, but communicating with one another so it doesn't feel like two separate strands of effort.
It's amazing, isn't it, how a lot of the conversations that we have around family business, be it next gen, older generation, succession governance, it's all about conversation and communication, and actually having honest, open conversation and being honest with yourself, so you can be honest with the people you work with and your family to reduce those conflict points. Nike, what would you say in terms of improving the chances of success from both different generations?
I think I'd also add, in terms of the older gen, to think about their exit plan. We often talk a lot about, like you said, Marie, what the next gen can do in entering and how they can develop, but we don't talk enough about how the older gen can exit, because often that interferes with the ability for the next gen to grab on, because the older gen haven't let go. So what is the exit plan in terms of, as you're entering into this new phase of life, what do you envision and what will you be doing? What are your passions? Because obviously, quite often the business has formed such a central part of identity, significance, status, and letting go of that can be challenging. So what is going to fulfill you and personify you and in this new season of life as you're letting go? Another one I'd say is for the older gen, not to entering into a season of letting go and not micromanaging. So becoming more of learning the art of being available to help and guide and steer the next gen, but also giving them room to learn for themselves, allowing them to learn experientially. So not just telling them what to do, but giving them room to experience the business for themselves and to make mistakes. Can we say that? Because we learn from our mistakes, right? Obviously, we don't want high stakes mistakes that will lead to the demise of the business, right? So we'll have controls around that, but just allowing for the next gen to find themselves, to find their leadership style, to gain their judgment and their critical thinking is really important, because there will be a point where you're not there. They have to be the captain of the ship and make these decisions, right? So it's important that they've tested and tried their leadership. What else would I say? I think those would be the main points.
Okay, brilliant. Good advice all around. Gavin, I'm going to come to you now.
Yeah, so on the next gen front, I think you've got to be respectful about the success to date, because without that success, you wouldn't have the opportunity that you have, and appreciation that you also have the chance to bring it to the next level. So that's pretty critical for the next gen to bear in mind. On the older generation front, I would probably say the best advice there is more of a reverse mentoring approach, whereby you understand that we've got to a point in time and we've been hugely successful. So in your eyes, as a next generation younger person, what do we have to do to make this even bigger and better than we ever would have imagined? And given a younger person that mentoring power, number one, builds their confidence up to show that the person that has given them that opportunity realizes they've got the capability, but equally they have a chance to have the strategic mindset to take the journey of the company where they feel is next best thing. But whilst we go on that journey, you need to remember that you cannot replace experience. So whilst the older generation, maybe more resistant to change and technology and the new blue sky thinking, experience is priceless. So make sure you learn from it and you accept that you have to listen, because communication is critical.
Fantastic. A couple of questions have come in, and Gavin, you've alluded to this earlier. Actually, one's for you. It's how can you expand, or can you expand on how you bring or take people with you on your journey? What do you do to make that happen? So
definitely tone and tact is one that's mission critical. Don't come in with bravado and the untouchable aspect. You're part of a team. You've got to work within that team, and you've got to be willing to work harder than anyone else to prove that you're here to stay and make a genuine difference. Again, I think I mentioned to it earlier on, is bringing people on the journeys that you're listening to them as well. You're not instructing all the time. You've got to take on board what all of these great people that you have employed are saying that we need to do to make impact. And on the communication front, it's absolutely critical that you do it. You send messages out that have meaning, and make sure you do it regular and often. A very quick example was during the COVID crisis, Paul, we identified that mental health issues were getting stronger with some of our team members, and we felt that we had to set up mental health workshops and loads of advice to say if people were genuinely having a difficult time, we're here for them. Whilst we're not mental experts, we have the connections to get them help. And thankfully, there was one individual who reached out to us who genuinely needed help because they were having a very, very difficult time. And it only takes one person to do that to make a difference. So, without that regular communication, that individual may have never have been helped. So making sure that you do it regular and often is really, really critical. Yeah.
A lot of what you're talking about there is culture and values and how that impinges on just the daily way the business operates. There's also a little bit of legacy in there, isn't it, in terms of the older generation creating something they can pass on and stewardship for future generations. Do you have conversations about legacy as kind of open conversation about what you want to try and create to leave behind? Because obviously you're creating your legacy now. It's not something you just leave behind at the end. It's something you perpetuate during your own lifetime. Is that something you think about, Gavin?
Yeah, for sure. Because again, if the success hadn't have happened, there'd be nothing to leave behind. So you've got to be honest. I suppose in the early days, I may have been inferior to not be open and honest as much as I am now. And my dad and I have a fantastic relationship where we can chat about these things and work out, the next parts of the journey. So I think once you break down those barriers of the awkwardness, it definitely helps open up a little bit more. And beforehand, you may have had to say something in 3 different ways before you actually got it out. But now, just with experience and maturity, you can cut to the chase and say what you need to get the right answer.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. Mario, do you got anything to add? The legacy is really important, isn't it, in terms of a conversational piece? And it's something that's sometimes quite hard for the next gen to take on board. Do you have a view on legacy, next gen, and general business purpose going forward?
Firstly, I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that conversation there, that when Gavin said you just sort of take it on board and go for it with your dad. And it is that, isn't it? It's about a nod to, and as advisors, we have to be careful of that as well. Yeah, there is so much success that's already there. We would never be called in to work with family businesses without having to properly acknowledge you are the ones that know your business and you have created a success. And I think it's very important to make that acknowledgement of all of the elder generations, especially the founders in the family business as a next gen. And it allows you to have a different conversation about the entrepreneurial ideas that you have and where the business has to adapt to survive. We've had to have those difficult conversations, even as owners of a construction business, with rising labour costs, with rising material costs, with the sort of mass resignation that's happening globally. And there had to be some difficult conversations about legacy. How do we keep nodding to the ambitions of the founder, and bearing in mind that was 1925, and what's important to us and the adaptability and the legacy of the family going forward. So I think that as you spend more time in your family, being invited in or just getting involved in that conversation is key.
I'd agree. I've got one last question for all of you now, just before we wrap up. You are where you are today. If you go back to when you joined your family businesses, however many years ago they were, what is the one piece of advice that you would give to yourself today in hindsight? And is there anything that you would have done differently in the subsequent years? Nikki, I'm going to start with you. Sorry, I didn't say they're going to be easy questions all the way through, but
I would say join community. I kind of fumbled around in the dark for 5 years on my own, and I wish I'd joined community. I'm a member of YPO, and it's been phenomenal. Speaking to other successors, family business owners, and just learning from them. What else would I say? I would say be patient. Be patient. Rome wasn't built in a day. Many things you'd love to change overnight, but it takes time. It takes time firstly take time to understand your situation, the business, the perspectives of everyone, the different stakeholders, understand, because I was basically an immigrant. I just moved from the UK, understand Nigeria, business culture, understand construction. So just take your time in learning. That's
good advice. Mairi, I'm going to come to you now.
Absolutely agree with what Nikki said. Yes, find your community, your home, your peer group as early as you can to help you have confidence. As a child, my nickname was Question Rat. I asked a lot of questions, and I put that to service with my clients. But I think I would have, if I'd taken the community view earlier on, I would have understood the value that those questions had and not been as nervous about asking them, actually, and realizing that questions add value. You don't need to have all the answers, but if you have some good questions to help people uncover their intentions, their expectations, the difficult points that are not discussed in a family business, that I think that it's finding a community to understand your value add as early as possible would be my advice.
Good advice. And finally, Gavin?
Yeah, definitely the coaching and the mentoring, and then the eating. I think the sooner you can do that, the better. I did take up on some coaching and mentoring, and it was a huge benefit because you had a chance of sounding off with people who were outside the family circle and the business circle, which then give you reassurance that you were either right or wrong, depending on what you were thinking. Common mistake that could probably be made for next gens would be expecting acceptance. So again, coming into the business and just assuming that because you're part of a family that you should be accepted into this group, and never take things for granted, because I think you've got it. My dad always said that he started the business with having the fear of failure. And it rings true, because if you have that little bit of fear constantly, it's like your pulse, and you can keep going and making sure that you're protecting and growing and being better and competing all the time. So I think just having a little bit of fear of failure is something you should always have in your back pocket just to stay alive.
Yeah, really good advice. I think the fear of failure is one side of the thing. I think also it's really important that you celebrate the successes of next gen that you have with the people around you, because it's really easy to continue to look at the next thing you have to do and almost continue to try and climb a mountain. But sometimes you just need to stop and say, actually, we did a good job.
Yeah.
And that I've made a difference. As Mairi said, you've made a difference and actually made a difference on today. Let's focus on today and then we'll move on to tomorrow. So guys, thank you so much for all your time today. It's a pleasure talking to all of you. Some fantastic insights. Being a next generation member in a family business is never going to be easy when you start out, but there are lots of resources out there to help, lots of people to talk to, and actually conversations like you've shared with us today have really helped make a difference, and hopefully we'll make some of those next generation conversations with some of our audience better going forward. Once again, I appreciate your time. It's been a fantastic session for us. Wish you all the best and look forward to catching up with you soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.